All right, hello everyone. My name is Rob Schenk. I'm the Chief Museum Content Officer for the National Medal of Honor Museum. Our organization is working to build a new cutting-edge Medal of Honor Museum in Arlington, Texas, and a Medal of Honor monument in Washington, D.C. And as we like to say, we are on a mission to inspire America. And talk about an inspiring topic, today I'm excited to welcome author Marcus Brotherton and Gary Beikirch. So Marcus is a New York Times bestselling author, and his books include a widely acclaimed Shifty's War, We Who Are Alive and Remain, A Company of Heroes, and Feast for Thieves. And his latest book is Blaze of Light, the inspiring true story of Green Beret medic Gary Beikirch, Medal of Honor recipient. He and his wife and 3 children all live in Pacific Northwest. And you can find out a lot more about Marcus at his website, which is marcusbrotherton.com. So thank you, Marcus, for joining us.
Thanks, Rob. Great to be here.
And Gary Beikirch was born in Rochester, New York, and he entered the United States Army in 1967 and became a member of the Army Special Forces, the legendary Green Berets, and trained as a combat medic. Gary served during the Vietnam War with the 5th Special Forces Group and was assigned to Camp Dak Seang in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. And on April 1st, 1970, Sergeant Beikirch was seriously wounded several times during an assault by North Vietnamese forces on the compound. But despite these wounds, Gary continued to return to the battlefield, being carried on a stretcher to provide medical care to the wounded. And it was for this heroic action that Gary was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Richard Nixon in 1973. In addition to the Medal of Honor, Sergeant Beikirch is also the recipient of the Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster, Silver Star, Vietnam Cross of Gallantry, and the Bronze Star, amongst many other decorations. But after leaving the Army in 1971, Gary graduated from the White Mountain Seminary in New Hampshire, and later received a master's degree in counseling. Later, he worked as a guidance counselor at Greece Arcadia Middle School in Rochester, New York, and has been active in engaging civic and educational groups throughout the nation. Gary and his wife, Lolly, have 3 children and 14 grandchildren. 14 grandchildren, you should almost get a medal just for that. But I also want to say that Blaze of Light is the story not only of Gary's actions on April 1st, 1970, but also his struggle to confront and overcome his many post-war challenges. It's a journey filled with courage and faith. And I just got to say, here's my copy. This was a fantastic book. I really, truly enjoyed reading this. And as you can tell, I got lots of notes and marks here. And I would just highly recommend this to all of our audience as a book well worth your time. And I think it's exciting and important, not just because of the military aspects of it, but really kind of the post-war struggles that, Gary, you faced, confronted, and really in many ways, overcame. So it's a chance to kind of talk about that, and excited to have both you gentlemen here today. So Marcus, I might start with you. Again, you've written so many wonderful books. What attracted you to this project?
Rob, it's just a story that really fell into my lap in all the best ways. And then once it did, I pursued it with everything I had. A mutual friend of ours, a guy by the name of Danny Moore, he had called me up one day to talk about some books that he was interested in doing. And we started just talking about just guys we kind of knew. And man, he told me the story of this medic who had been seriously wounded on the battlefield and then continued to fight anyway. And then once the medic came home to the States, they found him living in a cave. And I just went, wow, that's just a story you just don't come across every day. This story has to be told. So fortunately, Gary keeps this really robust presence on Facebook, on social media, and I just reached out to him cold. The cool thing was that Gary and his wife Lolly, they've been talking for some time about telling their story in a book form anyway. And so we just connected very immediately, and it just all came together, and we just pursued it really hard.
Now you guys are separated. You both live on far ends of the coast of our country. How did you work on this project together?
Yeah, I'm just north of Seattle, and then Gary is near Rochester, New York. So, it's hard being on opposite coasts. We did meet in person, had Gary over to my house, and we had just a great time together. Gary is a tremendous writer and a tremendous thinker of his own right, but he did not want to write a book about himself. And having me on board, I can tell these stories because Gary's just too humble of a guy. But mostly he wanted to keep the spotlight on the medal and all it stands for. It's it's more than one person. It stands for the heroics of many. So Gary was much more comfortable having a story told about him.
Well, Gary, I mean, it's a very powerful story, and it starts from your youth going forward. And I guess maybe starting there before you actually enter the Army. I mean, what kind of young person were you? What kind of young man were you before you entered the Army?
Well, I had some unique things that nowadays is not so unique, but I came from a broken home. Father left when I was about 5 or 6 years old, never saw him again. Coming from a broken home back at that time, back in the late 40s, early 50s, we spent a lot of time moving from one aunt and uncle's home to another home. So during that time, as through the rest of my upbringing, I developed a real sense of independence, a sense of self-sufficiency, that if I was going to get something into my life that I really needed, I needed to go ahead and try to get it and bring it into my life. So I became very, well, I wouldn't say confident, but I became very self-sufficient and independent. And in a sense that part of my personality has stayed with me throughout the years, although Vietnam kind of tempered that. But I grew up in an exciting time. I also had a very large extended family, aunts and uncles. I had over 20 cousins, and growing up in the midst of that, I never really sensed that I was alone or a victim of divorce or anything like that. So there was a real great foundation of love and support that was really critical to who I've become.
Now, Gary, you growing up at a time in which the Vietnam War is beginning and becoming ever more prominent and significant, and can you tell us a little bit about your journey to entering the United States Army?
Well, I think like probably a lot of the young guys at that time, I didn't really start thinking about my future because my eyes and heart was focused on a young girl that I'd been going with in high school.
Right.
And we were kind of we graduated in 65, and things hadn't really taken shape in Vietnam, although a couple of the guys from our class had already enlisted and were looking forward to going off in the military. I chose to go in to wherever my girlfriend went. She was going to college, so I said, okay, I'll go to college. She was going to major in phys ed, and I said, okay, I'll go with you and major in phys ed because we're going to be together for the rest of our lives, right? That's my career, is being with you. We were there for maybe 2 months, and she broke up with me. And like many red-blooded American guys back then, my next move was, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to quit college. I'm going to join the military. I'm going to become a Green Beret, and I'm going to come back on campus, and I'm going to make her jealous. See what you gave up. See what you're missing. I sometimes say that as a humorous side, but there was some patriotic feelings that prompted my enlisting. My uncle was in World War II. My stepfather was in World War II. My cousin was a Marine. So there was some thinking about my duty and a responsibility. That also played a big part in why I decided to go into the military.
And Gary, you didn't just enter the military, you actually worked to become a Green Beret, the Special Forces arm of the Army. So there's all this added challenge and difficulty, and you become a Green Beret medic. And I was really impressed in the book about the level of training you received. This wasn't just tourniquets and how to administer morphine. This was pretty sophisticated training you received.
Right. Yeah. The Special Forces medical training was probably one of the most extensive in the military. Navy corpsmen go through a similar program, and then they work with Marines deployed with the Marines. But the program of training had to be extensive because with the Green Berets, we operated in very remote parts of the world, and we would be the only medical support that would be available to those people that we worked with. So we were trained in everything from all kinds of medical, surgical procedures medical diagnosis, lab work, is to include also dentistry, veterinary science. It was a very challenging but very rewarding experience, which is what I was looking for. I always liked challenges. And when I enlisted, I remember the recruiting sergeant said, well, gee, I don't know, that's a pretty tough thing. He said, and I can't really sign you up, but you'll have to go through airborne training, infantry training, and then maybe you'll make the Green Berets. You'll try out for that. And that was a challenge that I just said, sign me up. I'm ready for it.
Oh, it's a remarkable story. Now, Marcus, Gary gets deployed to Vietnam, and he's assigned to Camp Dak Seang. And this is, off kind of in a remote part of Vietnam. Can you tell kind of all of our listeners, about this camp and what the Green Berets were doing there?
Yeah, so at first, it's really a pleasant place for Gary to go to. Gary describes it as a jungle Shangri-La. I mean, he's chief medic of this camp, so he's in charge of 12 Green Berets and about 400 indigenous fighters, the Montagnard folks, and then about 2,300 women and children, mostly the wives and kids of the fighters. And at first, it's a very peaceful place. The tribe's people welcome him in a big, big way, and Gary wins the trust of the people. They make him an honorary tribes person, and it's great. I mean, he's kind of the main doctor of the camp, and he's just checking people out, and he's making sure that they're well taken care of. And in the off hours, he's taking kids down to the swimming hole down to the river, and they're showing John Wayne movies. I mean, it's summer camp, and the larger picture there is Dak Sang was a very strategic village to the war. It's about 12 kilometers from the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is the main north-south communist supply chain. And so everybody was monitoring this trail closely, and the camp was strategic to that.
And Gary, is pretty clear that Marcus said, I mean, you really formed a pretty deep connection with this tribe of Montagnard. I mean, you really are engaged with them on a very personal level. I don't know if you can kind of tell us all a little bit about your times there.
Well, there's my introduction to the camp kind of is a prelude to what my experience in the camp was. Being sent out into the jungles of Vietnam, into the highlands, and they literally are the jungles. I remember the first day that I arrived at the camp, one of the first things that we did was we chose somebody who would be able to help us assimilate into this new position in the jungle. And in the Montagnard culture, at the age of 12 years old, individuals became a contributing, responsible member of the tribe. So at 12 years old, people started taking on adult responsibilities, which at that time meant fighting. We had one 12-year-old who was an M60 machine gunner. So when I got to the camp, I was pretty apprehensive. I can remember growing up and thinking about, watching World War II movies and just saying, boy, I would hate to fight in the jungles. That would be so scary. And now all of a sudden I'm finding myself on a chopper heading out into the midst of the jungle. So I get to the jungle and I found this 15-year-old Montagnard boy named Dale. And I remember saying to him, Dale, you got to help me survive in the jungle because I'm afraid of snakes and I hate tigers. Dale, you got to teach me on how I can survive out there. And the Vietnamese word for doctor is Bác Sĩ, so they always called me Bác Sĩ. And Dale laughed at me when I asked him that, and he said, Bác Sĩ, he said, I don't want to teach you how to survive in the jungle. He said, I want to teach you how to live. He said, the jungle provides us our way of life. We go into the jungle to live. He said, I want to teach you how to be able to go out there and take things that will make you understand what it means to really live. And so Dale began a process of teaching me how to live. Not only live in the jungle and to avoid the snakes and the tigers, but Dale began a process of helping me learn how to live and what it meant to live in a community, to live with a group of people whose very existence depended upon their trust in one another, depended upon each of them being responsible, being dependable, being able to be counted on when needed. That was what happened to me when I became a member of that tribe of Seang. I had experienced a camaraderie among Green Berets, but this was a camaraderie that rivaled that kind of bond between individuals. It was a bond that I said to Dale, I want you to trust me enough that, he said, because I'm putting my life in your hands, Dale. I'm trusting you to protect me. And I want you to know that you can trust me in the same way. You can put your life in my hands, and I will do anything to protect you and to keep you safe. That's how I defined the camaraderie. And it was the same kind of camaraderie that we had among the 12 Green Berets who lived there too. But this was extending it to a whole village of people. And that was what it was like to live in this mountain-yard village, to be in a community where you knew that everybody could be depended upon. It was a wonderful experience. And that's what added to the Shangri-La experience. Not only the beauty of the jungle and the mountains and the waterfalls, but the beauty of living among a group of people who truly loved one another.
It's remarkable. And I think also in the account, I mean, being Box C, you were providing a level of medical support that goes well beyond what I think most people think of as a medic.
Yeah, I was not only their medical support, but as I mentioned, I was the veterinarian. I provide dental care. I was the preventive medicine specialist.
Delivering babies?
Delivering babies. Not only that, I had to train. I picked selected individuals that were Montagnards who I felt had the aptitude, and I would train them in medical procedures. And then we would do our military operations to, the surveillance of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, ambushes, things like that. But the amazing thing to me was just the process of, as the doctor for the village, trying to assimilate into their culture and becoming one of them. And being the doctor, it was my responsibility too to develop a relationship with the witch doctor, because every tribe had a witch doctor. Now here you have a 23-year-old guy from Rochester, New York, who's now living in the jungle, trying to develop a relationship with a tribal witch doctor. Yeah, that's an experience.
There's a sign, it shows up in the book several times, Marcus. There's a sign that it really impacts Gary both at the time, but it seems like later. I'm going to try to put it up here and just read it really quick, but I'd be interested in both of your reactions to that. So just give me a second here. So again, the quote, if you can see it, is, "To really live, you must almost die. To those who fight for it, life has a meaning. The protected will never know." So, I mean, that quote seems to really stick with you, Gary, and it does show up later as something that you bring and recall later on.
Right. Yeah. It was one of those things that as soon as you see it, and I remember seeing it in the team house, and it was one of those things that is, it's like as soon as you see it, it's almost like a blaze of light. It just enters your heart and explodes with so many different meanings and interpretations. And it had a tremendous impact on me. And little did I know that as my time in Vietnam went on, and as my time recovering from my wounds and living in the cave, that it would take on additional and more significant meanings in my life. But it was a very powerful, powerful message.
We have to understand the larger context as well of this particular battle. I think in modern history, the Vietnam conflict has been characterized as a fairly chaotic and uncertain time. The war, however, for the Montagnard tribe was arguably much more black and white. So the NVA, the VC, they had vowed to wipe the Montagnards off the map. In that culture, the Montagnards were seen as inferior, an inferior race. And so the enemy had vowed to obliterate them. So this was a matter of the Montagnards' survival, and they welcomed any help they can get. They were happy that the Green Berets were there. And Gary talks about in the book how his own war, he wasn't in Vietnam for Nixon or Kissinger or Johnson. his war was all about fighting for the people that he had come to love and support as well.
Marcus, it does seem you touched on the word which comes through, which is love. And you know, when you read the book, Gary, maybe you can comment on this, that you felt this deep affection for not only the other Green Berets, but you said for this tribe that you were frankly a part of.
Right. That was, I don't know if I want to get into this right here at this point in the interview, but many people have asked me, wasn't I afraid at any particular time during the siege, being shot 3 times, being almost overwhelmed by 10,000 of the enemy? Fear must have been a pretty powerful emotion that was going through you. And I honestly have to say, although other Medal of Honor recipients have disagreed with me, they said, Gary, if you say you weren't afraid, you're either lying or you're crazy. And I have to say that I honestly do not remember feeling fear at any time. What I remember more than anything else, was more powerful than the fear, was love. Love for those people. And that probably goes back to that saying that to really live, you must almost die. And I used to think that was applicable only to those in the military, that you had to wear a uniform and you almost have to die in a war, and that if you almost die and survive, well, then life becomes very precious to you. But as I look at that, and as I have grown through my experiences, and actually I used to teach this as one of my life lessons to my middle school kids, because they would say, Mr. B, you mean in order for me to really live, I got to go out and almost die? And I would tell them that what I've learned is that, no, I'm not talking about dying physically, but if you really want to know what it means to live, maybe what you need to do is die to yourself a little bit. Learn about caring about someone else more than yourself. Letting those parts of you die that prevent you from loving someone else completely. Prevent those parts of yourself that prevent you from forgiving yourself and forgiving another person. Dying to those parts of you that are so easy to hate someone else. Those are the things that, if you let those things die, you will really know what it means to really live, because then love will be more accessible to you. So to really live, you must almost die. And I learned that in that mountain yard village. And I learned it over and over again while I was in the cave. And I learned it over and over again through my life experiences when I left the cave.
Marcus, let's kind of go to April 1st, 1970. It's this fateful moment where Dak Seang is attacked. Can you kind of describe what's going on and the nature of this attack?
April 1st, 1970, everything changes. The idyllic calm is shattered in the night. Enemy soldiers have surrounded the camp, 10,000 of them. The people inside the camp, including Gary, they are outnumbered 24-1. And as dawn breaks, the shells start coming in. And it is an absolute shellacking. We're talking just continual incoming fire, artillery shells, the whole 9 yards. And the horrific part of it is, of course, that women and children are inside the camp. And so it's pandemonium, it's mayhem, and people are getting seriously hurt. Gary is hit 3 times fairly quickly on in the fight through a series of incidents that come in. He's hit in the hip, near the spine, in the stomach, and he is very quickly in a bad way. We're talking he's losing lots of blood. He is paralyzed from the waist down. He can't walk. His stomach and innards are literally hanging outside of his body. I mean, he is finished. He's done. And this is the first big twist in this story, is that so many people would have chosen that occasion to simply get out of there or to crawl under a bunker and hide. Gary does not do that. He knows that he still has a job to do. People in his care are getting hit and getting wounded. And so he calls these 2 helpers to his side and says these words that really need to live on and ring on forever. And he says, carry me, drag me, carry me around the battlefield. And so this is how this wounded medic keeps administering aid. It's a remarkable story.
I just find that remarkable. You're being carried on a stretcher, Gary. Not that you're even limping yourself. It's someone, these Montagnard friends of yours are actually carrying you around the battlefield.
Yeah, that happened later on. When I first started sharing some of this with Marcus, I apologized because I didn't think I'd be able to put in sequence the different things that were in my mind about that battle. I told him that it was like if you imprinted a specific incident on a card, a deck of cards, and then you threw all the cards in the air. That's what my memories are of that event. I have no idea about the sequence, but there are certain events that will forever be in my mind. And one of the first ones is the first time that I was hit. I was taking care of a Montagnard that was wounded, and I heard a rocket coming in. The rocket landed about 25 meters from us, and I felt like I had been kicked by a horse. And I remember having an out-of-the-body experience where I saw myself going head over heels, and I slammed into a sandbag mortar pit. And I remember thinking, wow, there's a Purple Heart if I live, and that must be what it's like to be kicked by a horse. And I looked back, and the man that I was working on was just gone, the pieces everywhere. And looking back on that, many times it was just an amazing thing. How did that happen? I was laying on top of him, and I'm alive, and he is not. But I tried to be able to walk after I landed, and I couldn't walk. But I immediately felt something picking me up, and it was Dale, my 15-year-old Montagnard boy, which he said something to me that I'll always remember. I said, how did you find me in the midst of this chaos? Because by then, they were in our wire. There were just things going all around. And he said, this is where I belong. I belong with you. And he carried me. So a lot of my memories, a lot of the action that occurred, the things that I did, I couldn't have done without Dale. I remember being shot a second time, Dale taking me down to the medical bunker. I remember telling him, I don't want to be down here, we have to be back out. So he said, okay, he carried me back out into the battle. I got shot a third time, and at this time in the stomach, and I remember Dale taking me back down, and it was pretty bad then. And I remember telling Dale that if I'm going to die, I'm not dying down here. But maybe that's the warrior spirit. Maybe it's the idea of I can't choose whether I'm going to live or die, but I want to choose where I'm going to die. I want to die in battle. So I said, Dale, take me back out into the battle. So this 15-year-old boy brought me back out into the battle. It was at that time that he couldn't carry me anymore because he got shot. He got shot in the leg, and so he couldn't carry me, but he dragged me. And then we had another Montagnard medic taught. They saw that Dale was dragging me, so they picked me up and put me in a stretcher and continued to carry me around. The other memory that's very vivid is we heard another rocket coming in. Dale rolled me over and laid on top of me. The rocket exploded, and Dale was killed, protecting me. Those were probably the most vivid memories that I have, and intermixed among all of them is just faces, and faces of women and children dying, faces of my friends dying, faces of the enemy as they came charging over the wire. But those are the things that I still see at night. Those are the things that I believe haunt every individual who's been through a terrible experience like that. And they'll never be the same. You'll never forget them. Never forget them.
Marcus, so, as described by Gary, he's so grievously wounded, and eventually there is the decision to medevac him out. Can you that's a pretty harrowing circumstance into itself, Marcus. Can you kind of describe that episode?
Yeah, and it was good to add there as well that we were able to corroborate all of Gary's story here, a number of places, people that he had worked with who are still there. I also do want to give a shout out to the Vietnam Center and Archive at Texas Tech University. they've amassed just a tremendous amount of material and after action reports, and so we were able to piece a lot of the story together from that. Gary does eventually get medevaced, and that's even a harrowing tale in and of itself. Just in fact, Gary, you need to tell this because you've just rejoined up with the guy who was instrumental in helping you there. So why don't you tell that part of the story?
Yeah, we had another vivid memory I have is when the first set of chopper was coming in to medevac me, and I remember seeing it come in, and I seeing it get shot down, and that happened 2 other times. Choppers coming in to rescue me, and I remember thinking, these are Americans coming in to try to get me out, and they're risking their life. Little did I know that back in our C team, Play Coup, there was a weapons Green Beret, weapons sergeant named Bob Hill. He had been wounded and he was recuperating there at Play Coup, and they had called for a volunteer. And Green Berets don't like to be back at the C team and Play Coup. We're supposed to be out in the A site. We're supposed to be out where the action is. So Bob had recuperated. He was just getting bored around there. So he heard volunteer, he'd go somewhere, and he said, "That's me. I'm going. I'll go." Had no idea where he was going, but he said, "Take me." So he's flying. He gets on the chopper, and he says, "So where are we going?" And somebody said, "We have to go to an A camp to get this American that was hit." So they're flying, and then Bob sees this huge cloud of smoke and explosions and light and stuff all over the place. And he said, "Well, we're going to fly over that storm, aren't we?" And the door gunner, who Bob describes as a young kid with freckles and red hair that reminded him of Howdy Doody. And this door gunner said to Bob, "No, that's where we're going. We're going in there, Doc Seang." And so Bob said, "Oh." So as they fly into the storm, the door gunner starts firing, and Bob describes it as, "I just looked at this Howdy Doody character, and he's firing the M60 machine guns like crazy and just laughing hysterically as he's firing it." And he said, "So I started firing too. Then I hear it on the headset. The pilot tells me, 'We're only going to be on the ground for 10 seconds. You got 10 seconds to get out, get the guy, and get back, or I'm going.'" So Bob said that it didn't seem like it landed. I don't remember seeing the chopper land, but he said it landed. But Bob jumped out, grabbed me, and pulled me back into the chopper, and took off. And that was my rescue from Doc Seang. And Bob and I had just recently, about a year ago, met again in a reunion, which was a tremendous time. But it was just he says that, what was it that caused me to do that, to go out there? He said, it was just a mission. It was what I was trained to do. It's what I was supposed to do. And that was the mindset of all of us that served with the Special Forces. It was our mission, and mission accomplished.
So Gary, you're brought back to a hospital in Vietnam, and you've got these terrible wounds. And I know it's some period of time before you kind of regain consciousness, but do you kind of remember coming to terms with your new physical self? You had been this vigorous, incredibly athletic, young man, and now you're in this hospital bed with, some terrible injuries.
Right. Yeah, it's what I called it was a crisis of confidence. Because here I had been such a confident individual. I had been so self-sufficient. I'd been able to achieve anything I really wanted to have it be a part of my life. Of course, except that girl that broke up with me. But as far as anything else, I was able to find within myself what I needed in order to achieve it. Then the military, Green Berets, added so many more skills to me that just increased this level of confidence and self-sufficiency, that I could go and live in the jungle, not just survive, but I knew how to live in the jungle. But now I'm in this hospital bed and I was dying. I knew I was dying because as strong as I was, as confident as I was, there was something happening to me that I didn't have control of. And that was going unconscious. That's a scary thing. I'd been unconscious plenty of times in college before, but that was different.
Yeah.
I'm lying in a hospital bed with men dying all around me, and all of a sudden I feel myself losing my ability to remain conscious, and I feel this blackness coming over me. And it's what I called not only a crisis of confidence, but it was my hand-to-hand combat with death. I met my mortal enemy, death, which we all have to face. And I took every weapon that had been instilled in me, every weapon that brought me success in the past, and I fought with death hand to hand. And it was like death was just laughing at me, saying, "Is that the best you got? You're not going to win past me." And I would go unconscious. And there's a verse in Ecclesiastes that says, "There's no man that has power to retain the spirit, neither has he power in the day of death." And there's no discharge in that war. This was my day of death, and there was no discharge in it. I was facing death hand to hand. And for somebody who had always been successful, this was a real crisis of confidence. And I was empty, totally empty, a shell of a person lying in a hospital bed, just waiting to die.
And Gary, this does seem to be the time in your story in which your faith journey seems to kind of become more significant. And you have some episodes here in the hospital which seem to kind of lead you down this path of faith. I don't know if you can kind of highlight some of those important moments.
Sure. I remember one time I came to, and I was looking around, making sure that I was still in the same place, that this wasn't some new place that I woke up to. It was still the hospital. And standing next to me was a chaplain. And he said, "I'm glad to see you're awake, son." I said, "I'm glad to be awake, sir." And he said, "I've been praying for you. Would you like to pray?" And I laughed I think maybe I laughed. I don't know. Maybe it might have been a sarcastic laugh. But I said, "I don't know how to pray. I don't even know who to pray to." And he handed me a cross and he said, "That's okay, son. God knows how to listen." And at 23 years old, this shell of a person lying in a hospital bed who had battled death hand to hand and had lost, I made my first prayer at 23 years old. I said, "God, if you're real, I need you." And it wasn't anything on my part. It wasn't any more sincere or filled with love kind of a plea that I made. It was strictly on God's side. Something caused him to respond to me, because all of a sudden I felt something. I wasn't magically healed. I didn't pull all the tubes out of my body and run around to the ward and stuff. But I felt that there was a peace that came over me. My heart was changed. I wasn't afraid of dying anymore. And I wasn't afraid if I never was able to walk again, because I knew that there was something out there, something outside of myself that was greater than my fear, greater than death, and more importantly, knew me, loved me, and was able to reach across whatever separated us and bring some calm and peace to my life. I said that my courage failed at that time, but my faith was born. I knew that there was something real, and that now became my purpose. I got to find out, who is this that's real?
You've described, not only the battle in Vietnam that you survived, but this battle in the hospital bed. Your feeling in your legs returns. It's a remarkable story of physical recovery and a spiritual journey that begins, but it also leads to new challenges that we'll get to. But I thought, Marcus, I might ask you, because one of the more truly painful parts of the account is Gary earnestly trying to reintegrate into civilian life. He's now, somewhat recovered. He's back in the United States. He's, trying to get on with his life. But it's a civilian society that's not really eager to receive him, and just kind of the way he's treated. Just, I don't know if you can kind of recount some of those tough moments.
Gary describes how he had healed physically. He relearns how to walk again. But although he is healed physically, he's still wounded in spirit. And those wounds are only increased once he comes home to America. And this is one of the tragedies of the book. Gary returns to university. Initially, he's intent upon becoming a doctor. It just seems like the natural progression of his medical studies. But at university, he is, like so many of his generation of military personnel, he is harassed for being a veteran. And we're talking literally shoved in the hallway. His books are pushed aside. He is literally spit upon. He's called names. There's one very poignant scene in the book where he is in the parking lot at the university in his van. And his van is surrounded by students who are shoving the van. They've discovered this veteran in their midst, as if that's a crime. And so they decided to take matters in their own hands by telling this veteran to get out. So, I mean, Gary, at that point, he's a self-sufficient Green Beret. He could have easily sort of taken several of them out. But we're talking, this is mob rule. And this is a whole horde of angry people that he's facing. And so the pressure mounts, and this is the second big twist to the book. Gary decides to drop out of society. If society is not going to welcome me back, then I need to find a place that I can shelter, that I can find some respite. So he hikes far out into the White Mountains, the northern Appalachians, and there he finds this cave. And Gary makes this incredible decision to actually make this his home and to live inside this cave.
You think of it as a cave, but it was a physical cave, Gary, that you move into. And I don't know. I mean, you describe in the book, Marcus, that Gary, you felt comfortable because of your Green Beret training living outside. So it wasn't such a terrible ordeal. At least you perceived it as not a terrible ordeal. But I mean, you really sought this solitude. And it seems like not only withdraw from this society that just didn't want to accept you, but also maybe to continue on this faith journey that you had started. So you kind of describe what it was. I mean, what was it really like living in this cave?
It's an ironic part of our story is that often when I've spoken at different events and I share my story and then I have to take some question and answers, people don't want to hear anymore about the battle or the Medal of Honor. They want to know what it's like. What about the cave? What was that like? And it took me a while before I could really gain insight into that. But I told them that I went to the cave because I thought that the way to heal was to forget. If I could forget about it, I'd get better. So then the best way to forget about it is just separate myself from everybody that's causing me hurt. I'll just leave people alone and I'll go into this cave and I'll forget. And they'll say, well, how did you survive? And I'll remind them that Deo taught me the difference between surviving and living. I didn't go into the cave to survive. I went into the cave to live. I wanted to relive. I wanted to find life again. And so I went into the mountains. I went into the cave to learn what it meant to really live. You must almost die. I reflected on that saying in the cave because parts of me had died now. And I wanted to live again. So to those who fight for it, life has a meaning, the protected will never know. I not only fought in that battle in Vietnam, I fought in that cave. I fought trying to reconcile everything that happened to me in Vietnam. The hate that instead of getting some support and someone to listen to me, I got people that hated me and spit on me. I fought those feelings again. To really live, you must almost die. And to those that fight for it, life will have a meaning, the protected will never know. So I fought in that cave trying to understand what happened to me in Vietnam. Was there a reason? How can I make that a part of my life? And it was a real tough battle, a battle that I fought for 18 months. It wasn't the only battle, though, that I fought in that cave that I think you know about. Because it was while I was in the cave that I learned I was being awarded the Medal of Honor.
I mean, how many Medal of Honor recipients learn they're about to receive a Medal of Honor and they're living in a cave? You might be the only one, Gary. But I think it's one of those, you read it, and I remember rereading the passage going, do I have this right? Have I read this right? That, you come out of the cave to get your mail and you essentially, I guess, you learn that you've you're going to receive the nation's highest military decoration. But as I recall in the book, Gary, you have a mixed reaction to this news. I don't know, Gary, if you can kind of highlight some of the challenges that this news brought.
Well, again, as I said, my original reason for going into the cave was I wanted to learn how to live. And I thought that living meant forgetting about Vietnam. Forget the past. Build your life from this day forward. Don't pay any attention to what happened to you in the past. But the problem is that all that hurt, all that anger, all that guilt was still in there. And I was trying to build a life on a foundation of hate and guilt and anger. And that's slippery sand to build a foundation of a life on. But I went into that cave thinking that that's what I needed to do. Now I'm being awarded a Medal of Honor for that. All of a sudden, it was like, when they told me over the phone that I was being awarded the Medal of Honor, I know that I just went, oh, that was my only response. And I was silent for a bit, and the guy, the colonel on the other end of the phone said, "Are you there?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, would you be willing to come down to Washington to receive the Medal of Honor?" And I said, "Yeah, I will." But I went back to the cave, and now I was wrestling, why me? What's this mean? I only did what I was trained to do. There are so many others who did so many other things that were more significant, more courageous. Why me? And that's a burden that I believe that most of us who wear the Medal of Honor, we have to fight that battle. It's a battle it's really difficult. You have to fight the battle of, what's this mean to me? And why me as opposed to anybody else? And that's an individual battle. And it's a battle that quite honestly, you have to continue to fight every day. Because if you're not careful, some things will subtly creep in, and some false impressions, some false bravados, some kind of feeling that you think you're something special more than anybody else will cloud the real meaning of what this medal is. And all of a sudden you'll be presenting yourself more than the Medal of Honor. And that's a battle that we all have to fight, that it's not about me. This medal is not about me.
Marcus, the account is it's riveting at this point, and you describe how Gary leaves the cave, and it's this journey to Washington, D.C. He's living this extraordinarily simple life, and all of a sudden he's in the pinnacle of the center of power of the United States. I don't know if you can kind of describe those moments.
Yeah, it's a real juxtaposition there of the power of Washington and then Gary in the cave and what he's experiencing. Gets this call, goes to the White House. He is wined and dined, and they have I think it's a $1,500 stipend, these two military personnel, to take care of Gary while he's there. Gary cuts his hair. By then it's to his shoulders because he won't be able to receive the medal in uniform unless his hair is cut. So he cuts his hair. They get him some new clothes, which Gary kind of resists because he's like, I don't need new clothes. Receives the Medal of Honor at the White House from the President of the United States. There's this lot of pomp and circumstance, and it truly is an honor. Gary does feel like he is receiving the gravitas of this medal. The remarkable thing is, when he receives the medal, he returns to the cave, throws the medal in a duffel bag, doesn't touch it for another 7 years.
Wow. And Gary, it's amazing just on the hair front, just the picture in the book kind of just prior to the cave. And you have one of the most amazing heads of hair that I've ever seen. And yet then it is kind of in military shape. You're there with Richard Nixon receiving it, where it looks like you're wearing jump boots as well there in the White House. But that's a really powerful moment. And I think it's interesting, as Marcus points out, that the medal, at first, you're still struggling with what this means to you, but obviously you've learned a lot about, what the medal can do to benefit others. I don't know if you can kind of describe some of your thoughts and your evolution there.
Well, those were lessons that I learned, started to learn in the next 18 months when I was living in the cave. And yet I continued to learn them even after I left the cave. But when I returned to New Hampshire, to the White Mountains, one of the things I did was I had taken a Bible with me because I'd become a Christian and I wanted to find out more about this God that I knew now was real. And one of the things that I did when I was searching through the Psalms is I found a verse in Psalm 49. It says, "Man that is in honor and understands not is like a beast that perishes." And so I said, "Okay, God, I've asked you why have I got this medal, and you're telling me that I need to learn something. I need to understand it. So I need to have you teach me." And so I began a process of reflecting, a process of prayer, prayerfully wrestling with God about why me? What does this mean? And over the course of 18 months, God brought an understanding to me of what the Medal of Honor means. And consequently, I left that cave with a message about not only the Medal of Honor, but a message about living, because that's why I went in there. I wanted to learn what it really meant to live. So I came out of the cave with a message about the Medal of Honor, a message that says that this medal is not about me. It's not about any one person who did any one thing. There is an honor that comes with this medal, but that honor is that it represents not one person, but millions of men and women who have served, millions of men and women who are still serving. This medal represents them. The honor that comes with this medal is that it shares a message that there's a different way to live your life. Every one of us that wear the Medal of Honor, we hope that this message is conveyed when people see this medal, and that we are able to find the words to articulate that message, that this message is about living a different way of life, caring for others more than yourself. And then I realized that this message, that the honor that went with this message and with this Medal of Honor, was that it's not about me and what I had done, but it was about God, because it was about him and what he had done, because it was only because of his grace that I survived Vietnam. So when I came out of the cave, I came out with a message about the Medal of Honor and about a God who's there to come into your cave, who wants to heal you, who wants to help you. I learned that forgetting is not going into a cave. Forgetting is having someone come into that cave with you, who cares about you, who will love you, who will listen to you, will not judge you, and will always be there with you. And for me, that was my God. And then also my wife, Lolly, who, although she wouldn't come into the cave, she wouldn't marry me unless I came out of the cave. And we've been married for 45 years. And for me, she's been the heart and the hands and the feet of God, coming into my many emotional caves, listening to me, loving me, being there to support me. That's the message that I came out of the cave with, about the Medal of Honor and about living a life for others.
Well, it does seem like Lolly is that person who helps you kind of move into that thriving part of the life that you really return to,
Yeah.
which appears to me this great success after so many challenges and personal struggles. And I know that it's not a conclusion, but it does seem like just this great kind of capstone in the story that Marcus has kind of told here of your life. And Marcus, I thought I'd turn to you and kind of, this book made a pretty deep impact on me, and I'm sure it will on many other readers. And I kind of wonder, what do you hope that the readers kind of distill from this book?
We've dedicated the book to anyone who's ever fought through a battle or sheltered in a cave. And this is a story that transcends the military community. It's a story really for anybody. It's a story of great hope. It's a story of great encouragement. It's a story that can even help people show them the path forward. As Gary describes it, if we have been wounded in some way, seldom is the answer to hide in a cave. That may be the respite that gives us some time to heal. But the solution is really found when we reach out to other people, when we invite them into our lives, and that they can help us and love us love us forward into healing.
And Gary, along those lines, I got to think that many others who have experienced combat circumstances or terrible moments in war will find your account most helpful and interesting. I don't know if you have words of wisdom or thoughts for those soldiers who have experienced some of the things that you have experienced.
Well, like Marcus said, when I spoke, I finally realized that many people probably wanted to know more about the Medal of Honor, or wanted to know about living in a cave than the Medal of Honor, because not many people could identify with fighting a war, fighting in the jungle. But most people can identify with living in a created cave, someplace that they go to change the way they feel, someplace to maybe where they feel that if they can hide, if they could just forget, that'll make them better. And I think that those of us who have been in the military, we become very adept at finding caves. It may not be a granite-walled cave. It may be a cave of just isolation. It may be a cave of shutting ourselves down, not allowing ourselves to feel. And if we can't shut ourselves down, we turn to alcohol, we turn to drugs to try to change the way that we're feeling. And unfortunately, too often, when we find out that those aren't working like we hoped they would, we end up taking our own life. Those are the things that are too prominent and too often seen in the life of those who serve in the military. So when Lolly and I decided to write this book, and we got connected with Marcus, and we started listening to Marcus and his ability to be able to take what we had in our hearts and be able to put words to it, we really began to pray that as people read this story, that they would find some words of hope, that they would find words of faith, that they would find words of love that would be able to help them come out of their cave. And the title Blaze of Light comes from a song, Hallelujah, by Leonard Cohen. And there's a verse in that song that says, there's a blaze of light in every word. It doesn't matter which you heard, the broken or the holy hallelujah. My life is a list and an experience of broken hallelujahs and holy hallelujahs. But we hope that as people read this book, that they will find that blaze of light. They'll find words of faith, words of hope, and words of love. Because those words were the words that are spoken by us through this story and by Marcus. And more importantly, they're the words that God speaks to each of us as he wants to bring us out of the cave and to continue to help us fight the battles that we face every day.
Gary, we're obviously in tough times today. The COVID-19 crisis certainly has gripped the nation and the world, and there's many people struggling with today's challenges. You have a medic background and dealt with many infectious diseases in the past, and I know this is a little bit different, but I don't know if you have any kind of thoughts on today's crisis and as a nation, how we can be inspired to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a while ago, when the pandemic first started, I wrote something to the Medal of Honor recipients as the chaplain of the Medal of Honor Society. And I had watched an interview where a father was talking with their children, and the father said, you know, when you grow older, you're going to be able to look back and say, you survived COVID-19. And the word that stuck out to me and struck me as a blaze of light was that survived. And what I remembered was what Deo taught me. And what Deo showed me, and what those Mountain Yard villagers showed me. We're going through a terrible, frightening things, unlike anything that many of us have ever gone through before. But I was in that jungle, a jungle that to me was threatening, uncertain. And Deo taught me how to go into that fearful, threatening environment and learn how to live. And so I would share the same thing with those who are going through the frightening time of COVID-19. That in the midst of this, There is a way to live. As Marcus had mentioned, inviting others into your life, reaching out. You want to really live, care about someone else more than yourself. Reach out to those. So often we see through the news people hoarding things and pushing their ways through grocery stores to get the last roll of toilet paper or something like that. Those are people whose mindset is only on survival. People can survive alone, but that's not what living is about. Living is about being with others, supporting others, loving them, helping others through difficult and tough times. We can make it through this as a country, as a people, if we learn how to live with one another. And by that it means almost dying to yourself, caring about someone else more than yourself. If we can do that during this time, we will get through this, not only as a people, but as a nation and as community.
Well, I want to thank you both for joining us today. This has been as amazing as I had hoped. And I think, Marcus, to you for writing such a great book and an account, and for Gary, your willingness to share this powerful story of all of these battles and ultimately your triumph and kind of the important views that I think we can all kind of consider to improve our own lives. So thank you so much. And again, just to hold up again my copy here, and hopefully you'll get yours. This is a fantastic read and well worth your time. And again, whether you enjoy military history or not, or just looking for an inspiring story, this is really a book for the ages. So thank you both.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Thanks, Marcus.
Thanks, Gary.